Rain dripped steadily from the rusted tin roof of Carter Auto Works, tapping against the oil-stained concrete like a slow countdown. Inside the garage, the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber clung to the air. Daniel Hayes wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days. His knuckles were cracked, his boots worn thin, and his eyes tired but steady. He had the calm of a man who had survived worse than unpaid bills and unfair bosses. Daniel wasn't just the best mechanic in town. He was the only one who could fix what others gave up on. Engines that rattled like dying lungs came back to life under his touch. Transmission failures that made other shops shake their heads somehow purred again after Daniel leaned over them. But to his boss, Mr. Carter, he was just payroll. "Daniel," Carter barked from the office doorway, adjusting his gold watch. "We need to talk." Daniel already knew that tone. It was the same tone banks used before denying a loan. "I can't afford your attitude anymore," Carter snapped. "You don't smile enough at customers. You don't upsell. You don't play the game." Daniel blinked slowly. "I fix cars. That's the job." "The job," Carter sneered, "is making money. You're done here. Pack your things." The words hit harder than any wrench ever could. Daniel thought of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, waiting at home, of the overdue electricity bill, of the lunch he'd skipped so she could have extra fruit in her school bag. He nodded once. "No begging. No arguing. Just dignity." The other mechanics avoided eye contact as Daniel packed his small toolbox, the one he'd owned since he was 19, the same one he'd carried during nights overseas when sandstorms swallowed the horizon and helicopters roared overhead. 30 minutes later, Daniel was walking down the empty roadside, toolbox in hand, rain soaking through his jacket. That's when the sky began to tremble. At first, he thought it was thunder. But then came the unmistakable chop of rotor blades. People stepped out of shops. Drivers slowed their cars. The air vibrated as 2 massive naval helicopters descended toward the open lot beside Carter Auto Works. The town froze. Military insignias gleamed against the gray sky. Carter stumbled outside, face pale. What the hell? The helicopters landed with explosive wind, dust and rain swirling violently. Doors slid open. Uniformed officers stepped out with purpose. One of them scanned the area before locking eyes on Daniel. He jogged forward, and then he saluted. "Yes, Chief Hayes. We've been looking everywhere for you." The entire street went silent. Carter's jaw dropped. Daniel sighed softly, rain dripping from his lashes. "I'm retired." "Sir," the officer replied firmly, "we have a situation. There's no one else who can fix this." Carter's gold watch suddenly felt very, very heavy, because the man he had just fired wasn't just a mechanic. He was the Navy's most decorated aviation systems specialist, and they needed him back. Inside the first helicopter sat a portable turbine engine component, damaged during an emergency coastal operation. Millions of dollars in equipment grounded. Lives potentially at risk. "We flew it here because this is your registered hometown," the officer explained urgently. "Command said if anyone can repair this without a full base facility, it's you." Daniel glanced back toward the garage. Carter stood there, frozen in disbelief, realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. The quiet mechanic, who didn't smile enough, was the reason helicopters flew safely over oceans. Daniel placed his toolbox down and opened it slowly. The familiar weight of his tools felt like muscle memory returning home. "I'll need space," he said calmly. The officers immediately secured the area. Floodlights were mounted. Equipment rolled out. And right there, in the same parking lot where he'd just been fired, Daniel began working. Rain soaked through his shirt. His fingers moved with surgical precision. He listened to the damaged component the way musicians listen to instruments. Metal scraped, bolts loosened, circuits examined. A crowd gathered. Phones recorded. Carter stood speechless as naval officers treated the man he'd dismissed like royalty. 2 hours later, Daniel tightened the final bolt. He stepped back. "Run diagnostics," the engine whirred, then roared to life. "Perfect." The officer exhaled deeply. "You just saved a multi-million-dollar operation." Daniel wiped his hands. "I just fixed what was broken." But everyone watching knew. It wasn't just an engine he'd repaired. It was pride, respect, truth. The commanding officer approached him. "Chief Hayes, command wants to reinstate you immediately. Full benefits. Double your last contract." Daniel looked toward the road leading home. "To serve," he said quietly, "is an honor. But my daughter needs her father more than the Navy does right now." The officer nodded with understanding. As helicopters prepared for takeoff, Carter finally stepped forward, voice shaking. "Daniel, I didn't know." Daniel met his eyes evenly. "You didn't ask." Rotor blades thundered once more. The helicopters lifted into the sky, disappearing into gray clouds. Silence returned. Carter swallowed hard. "Your job, it's yours. With a raise." Daniel picked up his toolbox. "I don't need a job," he said calmly. "I need respect." And with that, he walked away. The next morning, news spread like wildfire. Videos of naval helicopters landing in a small-town lot went viral. Interviews followed. Job offers flooded in. Investors reached out. Within months, Daniel opened his own repair facility, Hayes Precision Aviation and Auto. Customers lined up not because helicopters landed, but because integrity did. And every night, when Lily asked her father why soldiers had come to see him, Daniel simply smiled and said, "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people forget your worth. And sometimes, the sky reminds them."